Okay, so week 3 of Nurture Shock with chapter 3, Why White Parents Don't Talk About Race. So the overall theme that I got from reading this chapter was basically, does talking about race make things better or worse? Should parents take a laissez-faire approach and not talk about it and let the kids just figure things out on their own and make their own opinions and influences, or should should adults be more proactive in talking about race and making it known? And by doing that, what are the effects from doing that? And so the first thing I found, so they did a bunch of different studies, and basically they found that no matter if we talk or not with kids about race, kids are still going to see race. But they don't see it as one race is better than the other. They see it no different than looking at different hair colors or different genders, or, different favorite sports teams or whatever. They just see the differences and they can identify those differences. But what kids are actually, so they see these differences, and what kids are actually looking for are similarities to themselves. So, for example, when I was little, and I'd watch Disney princess movies, if someone were to ask me who my favorite princess was, every single time I would have said Cinderella, because Cinderella has blonde hair and blue eyes, and I have blonde hair and blue eyes. And so, because I look like her, and I thought I wanted to be like her, I looked up to her because of that. And so, she was always my favorite. I still liked Belle, just fine, but Cinderella was always my favorite because we looked the same. But now that I'm older, I can look beyond just the outward, or the outside appearances, the hair colors, and I'd actually say that Belle is not my favorite princess. And so it's the same with the kids. They're just looking for what things are similar to them, so that way they can start to form their identity. What does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? And so, so kids are looking for things that are similar to themselves. They're not looking for things that are better than them, or better or less than them. They're just looking for what is similar. And so one thing that they talked about was that diverse schools actually had more segregation than non-diverse schools. And if we go back to the looking for similarities in themselves and finding an identity in who they are that makes sense, white kids are going to want to be around white kids so we can learn what it means to be white, and black kids are going to want to be around black kids so they can learn what it means to be black, and Latina kids want to be around Latino kids so they can learn what it means to be Latino. And so it makes sense that they kind of group up into those, they find those similarities and they group up. And so going from all this information that the book gave, then it talks about how are we going to talk about race then. If racial differences are still going to be identified, how are we going to address it? And basically what the book was saying was just to be more specific when talking about race. He gave an example of this mom who would always say to her son, all people are equal. You can be friends with all people. And she'd say that to him and she thought he understood, and then one day he said, what does equal mean? And so instead of saying, all people are equal, you could say, like, anyone, no matter their skin color, hair color, whether they're a boy or a girl, they can all do the same things and should have the same opportunities. And so just being more specific with kids. There was one thing I didn't quite agree with, and maybe it was just how it was worded, but it was the idea of making kids feel guilty. And so one study, they had children read brief historical biographies of famous African Americans, and half the class heard how the achievements of the achievements of the African American, and other class-trophy achievements, as well as the prejudice and discrimination that they received from whites. And then after that, the kids were surveyed, and the kids who got the full story about the African American had better attitudes toward blacks than the ones who only got the great things that were said about the African Americans. But then the researcher goes on to say it made the whites feel some guilt, and it knocked down their glorified view of white people. And I just don't like the idea of making anyone, whether it's white or black or anything, feel guilty for their race. So I think that there's a different way we can maybe approach that, just not making them feel guilty. I don't like the idea of that. But moving on, how this chapter fits into social work. If a social worker were to be working with children or teens, and they see these segregations of whites with whites and black friends and Latino friends and Latina friends, remembering that it might not mean that they're being racist or that they're being discriminative, but maybe they're just trying to find their identity, finding what it means to be black, what it means to be white, what it means to be Latino. And just keeping that in mind. And also when talking to the kids, just reiterating that it doesn't matter what your skin color is, what your hair color is, whether you're a boy or a girl, everyone can do the same things, and remembering to take that approach when talking about race. So yeah, lots of good takeaways from this chapter.